This episode is brought to you by AudioQuest. The cable company believes great audio performance begins with great power. Visit AudioQuest.com for more information.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Darko.Audio podcast. This one quick on the heels of the last one. And today we are joined by regular guest, Srajan Ebaen from 6 Moons. Welcome, Srajan.
Thanks, Don.
And today, as always, Srajan, we're going to pick over the bones of some news announcements that have cropped up, well, since we last spoke, which I think was November, wasn't it? It's been a while since we've done one of these.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping you'll, as usual, let me start.
You're the boss.
Because I've got this is a big news story, right? And I say it's big because there are lots of moving parts. And it comes from a company who have really sort of caught me off guard. Let me move my microphone a little bit closer so that I don't sound like like I'm in a box. The company is AURALIC, who have been building a reputation as a maker of sort of steadily, well, I guess ever increasingly more high-endery streaming products in the last 10 years. But this week, they announced something that I saw as a bit of a curveball, and it's called the Aquila X3, and in its base configuration it's a network streamer and a CD transport. But you wouldn't really know that from the press release because they breezed past the CD transport bit twice without really going into any details, right? And then they also made mention of something called Lightning Cast, which is apparently a new streaming system. So I read the press release a few times, but I had to do something I swore I would never do on my website, Srajan. I know you spotted it. Copy and pasting the press release verbatim, which for me is just a point of shame. But I have to because I've damaged my shoulder and my arm and my neck, which if you're watching this on YouTube, you can probably see some blue tape on the side of my neck. It's all strapped up. So yeah, I had to copy paste to kind of, because I can't write at the moment. I can hold a coffee cup just fine, but I'm not meant to be sort of like with little sort of T-Rex arms at my laptop, bashing away. So
John had too much fun with his right hand.
Well, it became about because I worked too much before Christmas. Right. And basically editing videos where I shouldn't is have my laptop on my lap, on my couch, and editing videos like 10 hours a day for like 5 days. Which was just a bit silly in hindsight because this has caused me no end of grief and continues to cause me no end of grief. Anyway, back to the AURALIC. So I copied and pasted the press release. I read it a few times. I've got to say, I did think it was a little bit all over the place. I mean, this is the nature of a product like this when there's so much inside it, which I'll get into in a moment. But because the CD transport function sparked questions in my head, as did this new streaming system called Lightning Cast, I got straight on the phone to a chap called Richard Bates, who's AURALIC's main guy in the UK, and say, Richard, what's going on with this? And my first question was, if it's got a streamer, a CD player inside, is it a ripper or is it like a CD player? Now, what I mean by that, and maybe you can correct me here, Srajan, because I'm a bit hazy on this, but I think a normal CD player with a DAC inside, it reads the digital audio from the disc and then feeds that straight out in a data stream to the DA converter, which then spits analog out the back. Am I right in that?
Yes.
Pretty sure, right?
So far.
So the reason I ask this question is because some CD players of the last 5, maybe 10 years use CD-ROM drives, and they effectively rip the CD and then send the data out from a buffer. Now, I'm not saying that's what AURALIC have done here, but I did ask, is this a rip and send, or is it just playing it straight out? And Richard told me, he said, well, first of all, you can use this device, this Aquila X3, to rip the CD to an externally connected hard drive or an NVMe drive connected to its underside, right? So ripping is not in doubt. We can definitely rip with this, and you can also play a CD with this. So I said to him, okay, if you're playing a CD, does it rip it to a buffer and then read out of the buffer? Because that's what the streaming component, that's what Lightning DS does in AURALIC's hardware boxes, right? And he said, yes, there is a buffer. So whether this makes this a CD-ROM drive, I'm still not clear. I don't think... Yeah.
I'm doubtful just because this is a top loader. And at the price, which you will get to, my assumption is that it will probably be a Stream Unlimited. So it could be the replacement for the Philips Pro 2 or Pro 4, whatever it was called. You know, the most popular CD-only dedicated top-loading transport that now had a revival at the Austrian firm Stream Unlimited.
Right. I haven't followed mechanisms as closely as you. But yes, it is a top loader. This is the weird thing, because the hero image for the press release is a direct front-on shot of the Aquila. And you can see the unit itself, plus its linear power supply box, outboard box that sits beneath it. But you had to scroll down to find all the sort of overhead shots that show quite clearly a very cool and funky-looking CD mechanism. So I was just confused as to why they didn't even lead with this or have this as the co-headline. You know, it's a network streamer, but it's also a CD transport. But Richard also told me something that also wasn't in the press release, that basically when you want to, if you want to buy one of these, and I'm going to tell you the price now, and I hope many people are sitting down, 15 grand.
Starting
at 15 grand.
Because I looked on the website, fully loaded.
Yeah.
Add another 10. I think it maxes out at 24,000.
See, I couldn't find the configurator. You're talking about a system configurator, right? So Richard told me about this. He says on the website, I looked yesterday, I couldn't find it. But basically, I think the base configuration is just a digital transport, isn't it? Like a CD transport and a network playing transport. Am I right?
Yes, and I believe the extras come with the analog input and the phono stage.
Yes, correct.
And then you will get to that, all the different finish options. Because they're not all the same.
They're not, but also another option is the Fusion DAC board. I don't think that's part of the base configuration, but I could be wrong. I don't know. I don't think it is. See, if you look at the back panel photographs, you can see that the back panel is divided into 3 pieces. You can see like there's some back plate dividers, right? So you've got essentially the phono and line level input board. And then you've got what AURALIC call the Fusion DAC board. So in the press release, they talked a lot about that Fusion DAC board and also the Leo clock that they've managed to put on the board now. So I don't know where that leaves their outboard Leo clock. I'm not quite sure. But anyway, it's on that board. And then you've got the digital outputs on the right-hand side. So I think it's a 3-step solution. So maybe you can have it as just as a streaming and CD transport. Then you can have it as a streaming DAC and a CD player, so obviously with the DAC involved, and then add on the MMMC phono and line level input as well to have it run as a sort of all-in-one preamplifier.
On a modular basis, sort of a la carte.
Yeah, but what they've done with the whole choose your own finishes, because you can customize the look and feel of this down to a pretty granular level as far as I can tell, like the top plate finish and then the metal finish on the CD mechanism. I think they've done that so that they only have to build them one by one as the orders come in. Because you can't, I mean, obviously they'll build a bunch to send out to distributors and dealers to sort of have a demo unit around the world. But I don't think they'll be making any to sit in a warehouse somewhere. Because that's an expensive business, right? To have, many hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of stock just sitting there hoping somebody buys the finish that you made.
But if I recall correctly, they are retrofittable by the user. So you can start out with one finish, and then I don't know whether they're magnetic or how they attach, and I don't know whether that includes the metal trim, but the actual panels on the top and on the sides, those you can change as your decor changes, and you don't have to return it to a dealer.
Ah, that's interesting. So I didn't know that. You must have found some kind of hidden page on the website, or maybe I was just having a special needs moment yesterday when I was trying to look for this. But I did have a long conversation with Richard Bates. But the other thing I was most interested in, and to be fair to Richard, he did email me about this in December, asking, would I be interested in learning more about something called Lightning Cast. Srajan, your cat is calling for your attention, I believe. It's like clockwork.
I can't hear him, actually. You're right.
I don't have a cat.
give me more.
Yeah, no problem.
Yvette is locking him in the kitchen now.
Okay. So yeah, Richard emailed me about this thing called Lightning Cast in December. And I said, look, it's really bad time. I don't have a time. I mean, December for any hi-fi publisher is a nightmare because you're just doing end of year stuff and trying to get all the shit that you're trying to get done in November finished and out the door. Anyway, so Lightning Cast is very interesting because this is AURALIC's own in-house developed solution for streaming, for maintaining the bit perfect nature of streams that come from the likes of Tidal, Qobuz, Amazon, Deezer, Apple Music, which I think is probably the most important one of this list. Have I said Amazon yet? Probably not, but anyway, so those. So what AURALIC are going to be selling is a tablet. It's a Google Pixel tablet, but it doesn't run Google's own version of Android. It runs a customized version of something called Lineage OS. Now, my cameraman Olaf is all about Lineage OS. He loves putting these custom operating systems on his phones because he's very anti-Google, doesn't want his shit tracked, basically. But Lineage can also be customed in other ways, and what AURALIC have done is they've gone deep into the digital audio routing of the operating system to bypass Android's. Well, I think it stopped doing sample rate conversion as of Android 15, I believe. But the problem is if you're using the tablet as the remote control, you've generally got two options to get the audio into a streaming device in your hi-fi rack like the Aquila X3. Well, you've got more than two, but let's leave Rune out of it because it's a paid-for service. And that doesn't help Apple people anyway. So basically, you've either got a choice of Apple AirPlay 2 or Google Cast. It used to be called Google Chromecast, but I think they've rebranded it recently. So a lot of people know now, I think, that Apple AirPlay 2 is a heavy resampler of content. So anything you send out from your iOS device, your Apple device, gets resampled to 256 kilobits per second AAC. It's lossy, essentially. But that doesn't really affect a Google Pixel tablet because it doesn't do Apple AirPlay. What it would do in normal circumstances is Google Cast. But when you stream with Google Cast, it's not gapless. The fundamental difference between Google Cast and AirPlay is not only the fact that Google Cast is generally bit perfect in most circumstances and Apple AirPlay is not, but also the stream travels through the phone or the tablet with Apple AirPlay and doesn't with Chromecast or Google Cast. So it gets handed off, right? And this is why I wanted to speak to Richard, because in the press release, they'd written, our new Lightning Cast system appears to the end user in a similar manner to Apple AirPlay 2 and Google Cast. And I'm like, yeah, but which one is it? Because they're very different in their behavior. And I think if you're selling a high-end audio piece like this that goes all the way up 25 grand, there will be many power users wanting to buy it. And they'll be thinking along my lines, I think, really. So I'm just going to put my tea down. I asked Richard about this. And he said that the stream comes from the cloud. Let's call it.
It seems like you're discussing a high-end audio.
I think we'll shut that down. That was my phone interfering on me there. Anyway, so you highlight the concerns. This is why Olaf runs Lineage OS, right? Because he doesn't want that shit happening. Anyway, so if you've got your tablet, not a normal sort of tablet, and you pull it from Chromecast, you can hand off a stream, or you can use an AirPlay device like an iPhone and have the stream sort of sent, using the phone as a proxy. Now, Lightning Cast, what I wanted to know is, is it bit perfect? And the answer is yes. Apparently, it will, whatever it pulls from the cloud, it will not mess with it. But I also wanted to know is, does the stream get handed off a la Chromecast, or is it just sent directly from the tablet a la AirPlay, and it's the latter? So the tablet, the Google Pixel tablet, which costs €400, that is essential. That's a pivotal part of the music playback system if you don't want to use Rune or AirPlay or all the other stuff that is provided as part of Lightning DS that runs on the Aquila X3, right? Mm-hmm. This is something extra that AURALIC are adding. I don't want anybody to think, this is pivotal to this device. It's just something I think they're developing alongside it because they want to roll it out further, and I thought it was quite interesting. So basically, the stream will come from Apple Music. It can be a high-res stream. It comes to the tablet, and then the tablet forwards it on, right? So that's the nature of what this thing does, what Lightning Cast does. I'm not so sure that every customer is going to be okay with this, because if you're streaming out a high-res audio stream, like a 24:192 stream, that's going to have a fairly significant impact on the battery life of the tablet, because there's a lot of data being sent, which is, I think, why Apple AirPlay doesn't do that, because they know that, well, they knew from experience with AirPlay 1 that it was very battery intensive. So there's that. But then the other thing is well, you've got Tidal Connect, you've got Spotify Connect, you've got an option of Roon. Qobuz Connect is coming this year properly, apparently, so I'm told. They emailed me actually recently saying it's now in beta. So it's only really Apple Music users that kind of need their hand holding on this one, Srajan, I think, by this Lightning Cast. Because otherwise you have to connect an iPad to the back of it, or use a streamer like an Eversolo or a FiiO or something like that. So it gets pretty complex quickly. So maybe this is why they didn't put it in the press release, but I wanted to know about this, just as I wanted to know about the CD mechanism. Mm-hmm. And it's super nerdy, isn't it? Because you've gone quiet. So you probably glazed over when I was talking all that, right? Because it's so boring. But anyway, so this is AURALIC's new high-end piece. I have actually requested one. I said, can you send me one? And to be fully transparent, this is what I said to Richard. I said, look, can you send me one, and can I borrow it for 2 years? Because I think that will be I'm guessing that this is the life cycle of the product, and I want it around after I make a video for comparisons to other things. Mm-hmm. So I don't know whether they're going to agree to that. I've got no idea. I know it's a big ask. But I said to them, look, I don't want any of your advertising money. I'm not interested in that. I'm not going to bug you about it. I just would like to get one of these and have it around for 2 years, because it's super interesting. It does many, many different things. And it also looks pretty cool, I think. And
well, yeah. I think we should actually mention that it changes the established look a little bit. Because AURALIC never before had interchangeable panels, and some of them have sort of patterns, like geometric patterns embossed or engraved in them. It looks very trick, but it does not look like your AURALIC of yesteryear. And so if you mix and match a complete AURALIC system, this one does not really look like it fits in.
I don't know what else you would mix and match it with, though, Srajan. I mean,
it stands on its own, pretty much. But
it is.
It is a one-box, do-everything kind of solution, so maybe you don't need anything else but a pair of amplifiers or one amplifier.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. I mean, the photograph I'm looking at on my website right now even shows VU meters on the display on the front. I don't think it's a touchscreen, but I don't care about that. So it looks like it's... I know, yeah. I think the overhead images, or the images that show the CD drive, look the most interesting. Mm-hmm. Not the front-on hero photo that they put on the press release. So it might sound like I'm having a go about the press release. I guess I am a little bit, because it just seems to kind of drift all over the shop and not really have a lot of focus as to what this thing is. And you can configure it, like you can configure it base level as just a digital output device, and then you can add a DAC, and then add another board for preamplifier functionality. So...
Well, yeah, I had the same issue, because I always rewrite press releases.
Yes.
So the moment I saw the top-loading transport, I was looking at, okay, who makes it? What is this thing? How high level are we talking? And there was not a single word about it. And I thought, well, this is strange. I mean, this is the talking point. Why aren't you not talking it up? And I'm not going to pick up the phone and ask you. You sent me the press release. I put something up, but I expect you to deliver the information that you want me to put up there. I
agree.
Very odd.
I picked up the phone because of my shoulder, because I couldn't write anything, and I felt a bit guilty about doing the copy paste.
I'm glad you did.
And I knew I wanted to talk about it on this podcast, so I thought, okay, I need to know more than what's in the press release, right? Because that's what I like to do. I think I probably, even if I'd rewritten it, I probably would have phoned Richard anyway, just to get more info on it, because like you, I wanted to know about the CD drive that was just breezed on past. I'm like, come on, there's a CD drive in here. You've got like what, 6 paragraphs about the variable frequency external PSU, which is interesting, sure, but as from a functional point of view, the CD playback, I think, is more important than that.
But while you just brought this up, this is basically like a PS-Audio power plant.
Right.
It's the Class AB amplifier that regenerates the AC, and it allows the user, and this part I'm hazy on, it allows the user to select the line frequency up to 400 hertz. PS-Audio have that as well. You can dial in different frequencies and change the sound. How that works and why you would want it, I don't know, but this is part of this package.
Right. Yeah, I didn't even get near that because I was too focused. I actually was really focused on Lightning Cast, to be honest.
Right.
I wanted to know what was going on with that. So Lightning Cast is like AirPlay. And yes, it is gapless. I did ask, is it gapless? They said yes. So it's like an AirPlay solution for high-res audio that comes from the cloud from any number of services. I should have said that first of all, really, shouldn't I? Rather just...
But now, do you think this will remain exclusive to AURALIC, or do you think that it will become available to OEM? I mean, for example, Lumen have worked very hard on their own app, and there are some companies that actually license the Lumen app to embed in their players. Do you think that this is like one sort of feature that they're aiming at with this new Lightning app?
Possibly. I mean, I think the press release did say that manufacturers are welcome to contact them about licensing options, or I think it can be used free of charge for non-commercial use. But I guess if you're Lumen and you want to put it in, sell it as part of a bundle, then obviously it's quite fair that a fee is due. You can't be making money off somebody else's generosity like that. So obviously they want it to proliferate, but I just think because the stream travels through the tablet, it's a stumbling block for me. I don't like that, because if you walk the tablet off your Wi-Fi network, or the tablet battery dies, your music just stops playing. Yeah, so I like things that hand off the stream, like the Connect services of Cobas, Tidal, and Spotify, which I know doesn't have a lossless provision yet. So, but it's interesting that they're actually trying to tackle this. I thought it was kind of cool, because in the press release they were saying how it's not ideal to have a touchscreen as your main interface for, say, Apple Music. And I would agree with that, because the touchscreen is very often over in your hi-fi rack and not right next to you, even though my little FiiO R9 is right here within arm's reach of my chair here, just as it is in Berlin. So that's an anomaly for me, but I know you're kind of a bit of a veteran in this department, aren't you, Srajan?
I do the same thing. I have it within hands reach.
Right, but then you run a
R7.
cable.
Yeah.
But you run a cable to your hi-fi rack, and I don't do that. Mine's just a headphone station, really. But
I guess this would be a good point to give AURALIC props for actually developing what sounds like a very sophisticated piece of sort of like a software suite on par with or as functionally equivalent to like Apple AirPlay.
Absolutely.
Now that a smaller company like AURALIC would want to compete against a giant like Apple and has the in-house engineering resources on the software side, I think that's quite laudable.
It is. I mean, if Apple ever release an AirPlay 3 and it behaves like a Connect service where it hands off the stream, then something like this is going to have its competitive edge severely blunted, because Apple Music is really, I think, who they're going for here, because Apple Music is very popular amongst the user base, right? Much more popular than Amazon and Deezer and even Cobas, actually, but Cobas has got a Connect service. I think most people will be going over to Cobas Connect, both on the consumer side, on the manufacturer side, when it becomes available. But I'm guessing there, so we could be a while away from this. But anyway, you're right. It's interesting that they are developing this and they're having a crack at it, and they're trying to solve a problem which is actually very niche. I guess it is, but yeah. Anyhow, I've run out of steam on that one, Srajan, so shall I hand over to you for your first bit?
Now, if I was to ask you, what is 15 inches tall, 11 inches deep, and 8 3/4 inches wide, you wouldn't have a clue. But if I add one word, zoo, what comes to mind?
Are we talking about a subwoofer? Is this what we're talking about?
Let's do this again. The dimensions, right?
Okay, sorry.
15 inches tall.
Okay, 15, yeah. I mean, I work in centimeters, but okay, all right.
11 inches deep.
Yeah.
And just 8 3/4 inches wide. Now, this last number should give it away.
Oh, this is a stand mount speaker, isn't it?
Yes, but what else must be different about it? What is the size of Zoo's driver that they use everywhere?
It's normally a 10-inch eminence thing, right?
Which wouldn't fit into an 8 3/4-inch baffle, right?
Correct. Right.
So, hello, this is going to be the new Zoo Method bookshelf, and it boasts their new 8-inch dual magnet bicone. So it's basically a coax with a 1-inch titanium compression tweeter in its throat. It's the first time that Zoo are going down from their established 10.3-inch Wizardcone widebander that they started with in 2002, I believe. I mean, they've had this platform for a long time, and they've kept refining it, but they've never tried to scale it down.
Right.
This will be 94 dB efficient. They claim it will go down to about 60 hertz. It is in a front-ported cabinet whose baffle is just big enough to hold the 8-inch driver with the 1-inch tweeter cone in the middle, and then the port at the bottom. Finish options will be camera body black, which is some kind of a freckled, sort of textured black, and then a stock, smooth white. And the price will be $1,399 for the pair.
Okay.
And then there will be other colors and veneers by request. Also from Zoo will be a companion subwoofer called the Method. And if we roll back in time to 2005, so 20 years ago, they had a Method subwoofer with dual 15s, one atop the other, with a floating baffle that at the time cost $2,500. The new Method will be a single 15-inch forward-firing subwoofer in a sealed enclosure, just big enough to house the driver with a couple of inches of clearance around the front. And it will be driven by Hypex fusion amplification. So the latest version of Encore, which is, by the way, now the 5th generation since they initially introduced Encore, past UCD. And there will be 3 DSP profiles custom configured at the factory. So the turnover frequency will be dialed in, and the gain and the slope and the phase. But they will leave that open. So rather than locking the DSP, users so inclined can actually go in there and change the DSP settings. The price on that is still to be announced, but they expect it to be close to the monitors. So somewhere around $1,400, $1,500, probably no more than $1,600. So for maximally, let's say between $2,500 and $3,000, you can get a 3-piece system of 2 monitors that go down to about 60.
Yeah.
And then a subwoofer that is using a driver that they say is even more efficient than that of the original Method sub. So unlike the 12-inch eminence that they have in their current subwoofers, the undertone and the submission, those are like classic heavy cone woofers with a very, very big rubber roll surround. Heavy drivers with a lot of power behind them, so they go very, very low, but they are not very efficient. This driver selection, this 15-inch woofer, doesn't go as low, but apparently it is very, very fast, and it's very, very highly damped. So the focus here is on transient accuracy, snap, and definition rather than ultimate sort of low down power and reach. So somebody who would want to do home theater at very high SPL and they wanted to go down to 20 hertz, they would probably not go for the Method, or they would want to. I think the Method sounds to me more like geared towards a sub for music that doesn't just play along, but that delivers true sub-contrabass information.
So did you say that there is a switchable DSP setting so you can match it perfectly with the little stand mount speaker?
Well, if you look at the back of the Fusion plate amp, there is this switch and there's 3 LEDs, preset 1, 2, and 3.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And those presets must be configured. You connect that module to a computer, and you have to open a menu, and then you have to know what you're doing to actually write the program. Our users can access it, and that's why Zoo said they will leave this open. But average users will just toggle through the 3 profiles and find the one that best matches their needs. So what I assume, we don't have the details yet, is that the profile will include the perfect hand-in frequency where the sub is supposed to roll in order to match the monitor. But then the difference will probably be placement. Is the sub going to be in the corner?
Right.
It has a lot of room gain. So the profile of how the bass continues will change. And there might be one where it elevates the bass. Maybe they put the shelving filter in and are 3 dB up at 20 hertz. If you want more low bass, those things will be pre-configured. So the user doesn't have to bother at all.
This is quite interesting because I've always, I don't know how you feel about this, right? But manufacturers that release a two-way stand mount, right? And it'll roll off 60 hertz, 50 hertz, something like that. And I'm always wondering, why don't you make a matching sub for these stand mounts? Like I was talking to the guys at Vivid the other day. I'm thinking, I love the Kaya S12. I wish there was a matching sub for those because I would actually probably pony up for that because those speakers are so good, but then I just use a Kev sub. Now, I'm not necessarily saying the Kev sub is inferior, but it's not. But there's an opportunity here for that I think happens with home theatre systems, but music or hi-fi manufacturers don't seem to kind of want to fill in the bottom end for us.
Well, it's because subwoofers have gotten a really bad rep in high-end audio. For many, many years, they've been relegated to home theatre duty. And, the audiophiles would sort of giggle at the home theatre guys, and it's just like T-Rex and, stomps and submarine explosions that need these subwoofers. And for music, they are no good. Now, I've been one of the fewer reviewers who have pursued sort of stereo 2.1 or 2.2, where you use even bigger speakers and you electrically roll them off actively and you add the sub at the bottom, because I think that gives better results. But it's not a popular solution. And I think that's why manufacturers decide to let the customer pick from established subwoofer brands, like a Velodyne, for example, or a REL in the UK, and not bother with something that will probably be a low volume item. And so Zoo obviously already have experience with subwoofers. And so they don't seem to hesitate to do it again and have a third model after the $6,000 submission, and the undertone is probably about half. I haven't looked it up. It's probably, and now one that is going to be even lower. Right.
But especially one that can come preloaded with a DSP setting that will not be an exact fit, but will kind of get you closer, because this is the stumbling block, isn't it, for most people?
Right.
It's not choosing the sub necessarily. It's integrating it. It's knowing where to position it, where to set the filter, how to set the gain. That is the 3 main friction points for most listeners who want a 2.1 music system. So if a manufacturer can help people get there, I think that's solving the bigger problem, from the way I see it anyway.
Correct. Now, the other thing that I'm personally curious about is that, and I think you might agree, because we both have experience with Zoo speakers, is that they're 10.3-inch with a cone driver, and even the coaxial that's in the Soul 6 that you and I both have, and then the DWX also has a coax in it. That peculiar to that driver is it has a sort of a chunky, meaty, very dynamic, slightly darkish presentation. And as you go up into the upper mid-range and the presence region and the lower treble, it starts to get a little opaque. That's the price to pay for using such a big driver all the way up to 10 or 15 kilohertz, where that little tweeter finally takes over. And
opaque is a great way of describing it, yeah.
And I've always wondered, well, what would happen if Zoo used that platform but shrunk it down and then just, if need be, add the woofer at the bottom? And so I'm wondering, would this 8-inch coax have a future in a Soul 6 type speaker, where you put the 8-inch on the top, which should give you a little bit more resolution and openness towards the upper mid-range and top end. Since it will obviously roll off sooner, and possibly too soon for a proper floor standard, put a 10 or 12-inch downward firing woofer at the bottom of the Soul 6, just like they had on the original on the Definition 6, and as they do on the subwoofers. And you might have a different zoo voicing, something that might be a little bit more resolved in the upper bands, where people that don't like the zoo sound find it currently too dark or maybe not quite articulate enough. Right. It's pure speculation on my part. I find it very curious that Zoo are premiering this new driver, the first really new driver they have in 20 some years, in a very affordable bookshelf. But there it is. The Zoo
maybe that makes it lower risk.
Possibly.
I mean, I have seen photos of these. I think Sean's been showing them at shows in the USA.
I've only seen one photo. And that shows a very, very simple looking speaker with two kittens. One on top and one looking at it. To give sort of a size perspective that these are not very large. Oh, and one final point. Sean told me that unique for them is that this driver has been developed to sound as it should within 1 week of normal use. No more endless break-in, no more needs to be preconditioned at the factory for 200 hours. This apparently is going to be easy going right off.
Right.
And that's all I got on that.
No, this is really helpful because I had no idea about the backstory on these speakers. I've seen no press release about them. I could have missed it, but I don't think there was one. I don't think they're not available for sale yet, are they?
No, and I think the stumbling block is cabinetry.
Right. Okay.
Sean told me that pretty much all the other parts are at hand, but the cabinetry is what they're currently working on. And the monitor will be first. And once that's out and shipping, he's going to finish up the sub. So that's going to sort of trundle in second.
I think I would be more interested to. This is why I mentioned manufacturers making subwoofers, right? Because I'm very interested in kind of reviewing 2.1 systems, things together. Because that's kind of how you would probably use it, right? That's my interest anyway. So I won't look at the stand mount until the sub's available, and then as a 2.1, that could be pretty potent for around 3K.
Yeah, I think so.
Now this one is a little bit complicated, actually.
Another one that's complicated.
Yeah, I've really bitten them off, haven't I? So let me. I'll try and keep it simple if I can. Germany's T+A. Right? They announced a new loudspeaker at the end of last year. Again, the press release came through. It said some things. I'm like, but this is only half the story, right? Because basically, it's a 3-way bass reflex floor stander. It's got 2 15-centimeter bass drivers, 2 11.5-centimeter mid-range drivers, and a 2.5-centimeter or 1-inch magnesium dome tweeter, right? That's the start of the story. Now, Srajan, I'm going to ask you, what is the number one thing that will mess up the sound of this speaker in some situations? Potentially. Or any speaker. And it doesn't have to be this one.
Well, it's the room interaction. Right?
It's the room interaction, right.
And in this case, with the driver array, I don't know whether this applies for quasi-line source directivity, like a more cylindrical waveform than a point source, because you have multiple parallel drivers covering the same frequency. But I don't know technically how many drivers do you need before it officially becomes a line source and does that different radiation thing.
Yeah, so I think that they have another speaker which has a line array in it, but it's not this one as far as I know. This one is called the Pulsar S130. Now, in the press release, it said, in fact, I can read it because I've got it here. It says, the symmetric directivity system, which is what T+A call it, channels the speaker's energy toward the listening area, minimizing floor and ceiling reflections that might otherwise disrupt the experience, as is often the case with conventional designs. So I'm thinking this is a big claim, right? This is quite significant.
But do they say how they do it?
Exactly, the press release didn't say. So I'm like, okay, so I know Ziggy at T+A, so I emailed him and said, look, can you explain how you've done this? Because otherwise I've only got half a story, right? And I saw this press release go out, and I was looking for the answer in those stories, and it wasn't there. So, okay, so I'm going to have to kind of read a little bit from my notes here, but basically what Ziggy is the CEO or the founder. He was saying, look, if you look at this speaker, you've got a mid-range driver, a tweeter, and a mid-range driver, right? So 2 mid-ranges surrounding a tweeter. And he said, many people will assume this is a Diapolito or Dapolito configuration, and it is not. Because, and I might have to quote him actually, yeah. He said, the distance between the diaphragm centers of the 2 mid-range units must be no greater than 2/3 of the wavelength of the crossover frequency between the mid-range and the treble drivers, right? That's quite a complicated sentence, but basically you need some distance. And he said you couldn't do it with the baffle size and the driver sizes for this particular speaker. So what he's done, I'm filling in some blanks here actually, I think he's using phase cancellation to introduce a more directed sound. So basically, there's not going to be as much sound going upwards, there's not going to be as much sound firing downwards, so you don't get the ceiling and floor bounce, right? So what he said basically the crossover in the Pulsar 130 sits at 2.2K. So basically, and as he said, like at 2K, a crossover point would require the mid-range driver centers to be placed 11 centimeters apart, and you can't get them close enough, right? So that's why it's not a Diapolito, right? So anyway, back to my idea of like phase shift. This is not his words, this is what I'm thinking is going on. He said, by employing 2 11.5 centimeter mid-range units and a carefully optimized crossover design, we have achieved a significant vertical concentration of the sound due to interference, that's the key word, isn't it? Interference above and below the 2 mid-range drivers. So it's some kind of signal cancellation, right?
Yeah, but the cancellation doesn't occur between the drivers, where the tweeter is, but above and below.
Yes.
Which is why it's cancelling ceiling and floor reflections, or minimizing them.
Right.
And that gets us back again towards the quasi sort of spherical, not spherical, but cylindrical waveform. Even though they're achieving it not with the line source, but apparently in the crossover. Right?
Well, this is the thing. He didn't go far enough in saying, well, it's a carefully optimized crossover design. We have achieved significant vertical concentration due to interference, right? So interference, as we know from high school science, is one sound cancelling out the other, right? Being of inverted phase. Mm-hmm. So this is what I mean by phase cancellation. I should just use the word interference, shouldn't I? But there we go. I'm an idiot, but whatever. So, but equally, I think I just thought this was interesting because I'm like, why hasn't anybody else done this? Because ceiling bounce, as I've discussed many times when I've talked about room treatment with you, is I've said, the ceiling is the number one thing to treat. So ceiling bounce is, people like to get really hung up on first reflections on either side of the speakers, but few people really talk about what's going on above. And clearly T+A are looking at what's going on above, what's going on below, and saying, well, okay, we can do something about that in the speaker itself.
Well, a competitor might call what they're doing controlled directivity.
Yes.
And a lot of people try to do it with either horns or waveguides. Right. And it's usually done between like a tweeter and a mid-range, where to disguise the different radiation patterns at the crossover frequency, they use a waveguide on the tweeter whose diameter is the same as that of the mid-range. And that sort of makes the dispersion pattern difference smaller, so it's harder for the ear to sort of hear a theme. So this sounds like they're achieving controlled directivity, but rather than using waveguides and horns, they're doing it primarily in the crossover and their driver spacing.
Right, yeah, and the driver spacing, that's important, I think, with this thing. I mean, he did send me a couple of graphs to show like the side-on profile of the speaker and its radiation as it comes out in a traditional sense, and then with this new directivity system, symmetrical directivity system. And it does seem to show that there isn't as much energy going upwards or downwards.
Mm-hmm.
But I still, well, for two reasons I thought it was interesting, because number one, what they've done, but number two, why was this information not in the press release, right? You're selling, what is it, an $8,000 speaker, $7,000 speaker? $7,500 US, right?
Mm-hmm.
People want to know about this stuff. They're power users. I mean, yeah, there'll be some people who just don't care. They go, I like the look of that, I like the sound of that, I'll buy it. But I think, you know, if you're looking at that, you're going to be researching it and you want to know what it is and how the manufacturer's done it. Because in this age of internet cynicism, people just call bullshit on stuff like this if it's not explained properly or to a level of detail that would satisfy most people.
Well, I think that's back to manufacturers having to tell their own story or to drum their own drum. And some do it overly. They do it too much. We won't mention names, but they make all kinds of like very super detailed claims. And then others have an interesting story to tell, but they don't know how to do it themselves, to tell that story. Then they rely on somebody else to do it for them.
I guess that monkey is me today, isn't it?
Hello.
I need a little miniature symbol, you know. Well, anyway, I just think, Pulsar S130. I've not seen this before. Maybe it's ages old, and somebody will say, "Oh, no, this company was doing this in the 1970s, right?" But I was born in the 70s. Like, I don't know. But I just thought it was more interesting than your average floor standing loudspeaker coming out with this many drivers, and we've done this with the crossover, and the cabinet is this, the end. I thought it was kind of cool.
All right. I don't know whether you noticed, but, you know, in the glut of like best of or favorite of the year, which always happens in December, I had something that I've never done before. I had a little page that was basically my favorite brand discovery of 2024. Did you see that by any chance?
I did. I did actually go through it because whilst I was resting my shoulder, I was like, what else am I going to do? Read some other hi-fi stuff, see what's going on. I've forgotten the brand though. What you have to remind me, because I'm sorry.
4 letters that start with an A. And the company is from China. And it's not FiiO.
It's not Aune, is it?
Yes.
Aune?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because you mentioned them on the
Yeah.
On, is that how you say it? On, okay.
I'm not quite sure.
Right.
However, I had previously reviewed 2 of their headphones.
Yeah.
And in fact, I'm wearing one of them. This is called the SR7000, and it's 639 euros. The open back version is 329 euros. Now I'm going to show John something, and he's going to describe what he sees. Let's see whether I can.
I'm going to describe it for the benefit of listeners listening.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got a sort of half-width kind of unit. It looks like a headphone amplifier. It's got a screen in the middle, volume pot on the right. To the left, we've got 3 headphone outputs, single-ended, probably 3.5 mil.
No, it's 4.4 mil.
4.4 mil balances. Okay, then we've got 6.35 single-ended and a balanced XLR headphone output.
Correct. And another thing to notice is that it's not an entirely square box. It might be hard to see, but it's actually slightly curved on the top.
Yeah, the top lid is curved.
Right.
Yeah, it's got a curved profile. Yeah.
And now to the rear.
So the rear, we've got inputs and analog inputs and outputs, both single-ended and balanced XLRs, and a main socket. So it's pretty simple.
That's it.
Right, but it's probably not simple, is it?
And then this is also what comes with it. A full function, small metal remote.
It's like a finger remote.
So we were just looking at, it's called the S17, and it's been around for, I think, about a year and a half. And it just recently got an upgrade, and it's now called the Evo.
Okay.
And it's 799 euros, so well below 1,000. It is a very powerful, pure Class A, true dual differential preamp / headphone amplifier that does 7.5 watts per channel into 32 ohms.
Okay.
For those people to whom those are just numbers, if we take one of the most insensitive, most hard to drive headphones, like the hi-fi Men's Sfara, the usual recommendation is that they like to see 3 watts into 32 ohms. If an amplifier can deliver that, the Sfara should be good to go, and by inference, anything else that the market has to offer. So this basically has well more than twice the power that you need. And then it has some unusual features. First of all, true dual differential means 8 transistors per channel.
Right.
It also means a linear power supply in this case, and an R2R remote controlled attenuator. It has high and low gain, and then it has something unusual in that the Class A bias is adjustable between low and high. It will always be Class A, which means that devices are fully on, whether they conduct or not. I mean, whether they amplify signal or not. The bias will be either 50 milliamps or 100 milliamps, and you can switch that on the fly.
Can you explain to me as a bit of a Class A, somebody who's a bit of a noob with this kind of stuff? If the conductors are always on, why does it matter? Sorry, the transistors. Sorry, if the transistors are always on, why does it matter what you're feeding into them?
You mean the bias?
Yeah.
I don't know all the details. All I know is that when you look at Nelson Pars's writings about Class A and what he calls the load lines and how the bias sets exactly where that particular device operates, that as you increase the bias, you change the load line, and with that you control the amount of distortion and sometimes even the type of distortion. Is it more second order, second harmonic dominant? Is it more third harmonic dominant?
Right.
So by increasing or lowering the bias, or in tube lingo, by running a tube hotter, so it doesn't last as long but it sounds better, or you don't run it as hot so it lasts longer but maybe it doesn't sound quite as good. There is some variability of what is safe for the device, which will still change the sound. So in this particular case, this is supposed to be a feature. It's supposed to be a talking point that you can, by remote, adjust the Class A bias on the device and change the sound.
Well, I'm sure.
Albeit, when I tried it, I found the difference super marginal. Now, there may be headphones that respond differently. And there may be listeners, I've seen some online comments that talk about day and night.
Yeah, but those guys are everywhere.
But to me, it was like pitch black night. I could barely hear a difference. But it's a feature. And the other thing that they changed from the previous non-Evo version is that now the volume can be memorized independently for preamp use and headphone.
That's useful,
use. So you can switch between the two and the volume will be remembered. Now, after I reviewed the 2 headphones and I bought the one I'm wearing right now, and then coming across this amplifier, I elected to sort of vote on, or Aune, however they pronounce themselves, as my favorite brand of 2024. Because previously I knew of the name, but filed it away as just another one of those Chinese brands like Topping, etc., etc., etc.
That's how I've seen it.
It was another one of them.
Yes.
But now that I've actually handled and listened to 3 of their models and seen the workmanship and the design and certain unique features, and then the pricing, all of which happens well below €1,000. They don't make anything more expensive. I think they're a little bit like FiiO in terms of wherewithal. They're not as big. They're not as widely distributed. I don't think they appeal to the same mainstream audience. I think they're just a little bit more niche, but I would rate them on a similar level of sort of manufacturing quality and sonic engineering. This is a very good sounding amplifier, And it is very much a Class A amplifier. So it's very full and very robust. If you're going after Class D type detail, it doesn't quite do that. But if you're into a KT88 or EL34 type tube amplifier, push-pull, that has a lot of power, that's the kind of sound you will get.
That's interesting.
And no tubes involved. And not a lot of money for what it is, which means it can drive any headphone ever made.
Right. And does it run hot, Srajan? This is my pet issue with Class A stuff.
It does. And here's the thing. On the display, there is a thermometer. And when you first turn this thing on, in our Irish climate, where right now we're around 6 degrees Celsius, but during the summer it might be 12 or 15. We're lucky if we get to 18, right?
Right.
This thing will probably start out within like 1 or 2 minutes of turn on. It will probably set at about 22 degrees. And then within minutes, as you're playing, the thermometer keeps ticking up. And it keeps ticking up. And you play another song that lasts 10 minutes and it's higher. I kind of maxed out around 58 to 60 degrees on the display. By the time you hit 69 in high bias, 100 milliamps, it will automatically switch itself down to 50 milliamps, just to avoid overheating.
There's a reason for that. It's not just about overheating.
I've never been able to get it beyond 60. And I've been playing it for 5 or 6 hours non-stop.
So I'm pretty sure there's...
But the previous version was a little bit infamous in that a lot of people said they could only listen to high bias for like an hour or two.
Right.
And then the device would automatically sort of level itself down. So that's one of the things they had to address. They had to improve the efficiency of the thermal dissipation. I never had the original, but I've looked online for some user feedback of users that had the original and this one, and they all, without exception, say that yes, this one doesn't heat up even remotely the same.
Yeah, so I think there is an EU law that says a maximum of 70 degrees. I think, because I'm pretty sure that's what Musical Fidelity, under the stewardship of Heinz Lichtenegger from Project, had to do in rebirthing the A1 amplifier.
To protect children and cats and other critters in the house from burning themselves.
Yes, so I think the upper limit is 70. I think it's 70.
Okay.
Because when I measured it with my heat, albeit not so scientifically with a heat gun, it was like 68, 63. You know, it was that kind of mid-60s level, and I'm sure somebody told me along the way that it was 70 was the max according to the EU.
I didn't think about that. That was sort of the magic reason for the number 69 degrees.
Right. Well, you know, that's why they step it down after it tries to go beyond that, Srajan, because we won't get into OF territory, not here. Okay. I think it's interesting, isn't it, how the Chinese seem to be encroaching on the conversation. You know, like not just the entry level market, but I mean, look at us. We're talking about lots of Chinese gear. Your favorite brand of last year is Aune, a Chinese brand. 2 of my favorite products of last year made by Chinese manufacturers, FiiO and Moondrop. And the year before, we both went for the FiiO, right, the R7. And I know that people who are sort of very enthusiastic about affordable like hi-fi gear, they're all across the SMSLs, the toppings, a lot of these other brands, some brands I've never even heard of. I know that they're mainstays of that area, but if I think for people who have like traditionally covered more, I guess, longer standing brands, it's interesting how even those Chinese brands are encroaching into our territory, right? They're not just, I guess, what you would call YouTube brands anymore, or
I think
blog brands.
I think they now become legitimate alternatives to Cambridge and Rotel, NAD, established brands that always had a reputation for value. And maybe they've raised their overall profile to be sort of less mid-fi and a little bit more sort of entry-level upscale. And I think these Chinese brands are now taking a bite out of that piece of the pie.
My final item today is actually from FiiO. I'm embarrassed actually how much I'm talking about FiiO these days, because every time they come out with something new, I'm like, that's right in my wheelhouse, right there. This one really isn't. It's a little bit gimmicky for me, but I wanted to share it because, basically, because of something Sony did a couple of years ago. They introduced a Walkman, a portable player, called the NWA306. And if you put an SD card into its backside and played music from that, it would give you a cassette tape animation on its full-size display, right? And I thought that was fantastic, even though I'm not a fan, as you know, of like using micro SD cards and their contents. I thought it was really cool. And I was thinking that somebody's going to copy this, somebody's going to do this as well. And sure enough, 2 years later, FiiO are doing this. But they're not doing it with a portable player, which you might expect them to do, because they make portable players. But they've introduced a USB and Bluetooth DAC, and I've got to stress there's not a portable player, it's a USB and Bluetooth DAC that when it gets a signal from either of those two sources, it puts a little sort of cassette tape animation on its fairly small screen. So the screen is smaller than the Sony. It is, I've got it written down, I think it's like 120, no, it's 80 by 160 pixels. So it's pretty small, but you get the sort of turning little cogwheels inside. And I quite like that. The product is called the Retro Nano, and it's coming out under FiiO's new sub-brand called Snowski or Snowski. But yeah, it's a Bluetooth DAC. It does aptX HD and LDAC. And if you don't want to do that, you can USB it into a laptop or your phone. It has an internal battery. I think it's got 7.5 hours on the battery. The battery is replaceable. It's one of those. It's like a bit bigger than one of those sort of finger AA's.
Okay.
I think it's a 10440. I don't come across them very often. I did once. I almost set fire in my kitchen. Anybody's seen that video will remember that. But I thought that was interesting as well. Like rechargeable battery that you can replace.
Bravo.
So yeah, I don't know. I just thought it was. I think we're going to see more of that. Replaceable batteries.
Now, if I can ask you a question.
Yes.
So this Mr. Banksy, or actually Snowski, right?
Snowski, yes. Yeah.
Why do you think that they see the need to have a sub-brand? If FiiO is so established, where do you think this is headed?
Yeah, this is always the conversation about sub-brands, isn't it? I mean, basically, I think your cat has something to say about this, Srajan, actually. You can let her in.
Is he out again?
I think it's because this is not what you would call a hi-fi product, really. It's not for discerning listeners, and I'm only surmising that because it sells for $60 or £60 in the UK. Yes, I've only got the US and the British pricing.
So we're talking Amazon level sort of distribution.
Yeah, well, yeah, or what's the Chinese one called?
Alibaba, and then there's AliExpress.
Yeah. It's that kind of product, right? So, but it does have 3.5mm output and a 4.5mm balanced output on it. So, but it doesn't. The press release didn't tell us what output power we're getting. People want to know about the output power. I don't know why. Like, we get press releases and people say, "Oh, but yeah, but it's on the website." I'm like, well, if it's on the website, put it in your press release so we don't have to go to two places. I'm not saying that I'm lazy. I'm just saying, like, if you're going to send out a press release, you got to understand that most of us are just doing this stuff. We're going to look at that one document and we're going to process that. And we're going to write it in our own way. Some people copy paste. I'm not a subscriber to that kind of way of doing things. But anyway, so this is just a kind of a little gimmicky dongle DAC / Bluetooth DAC that you could probably buy. You could buy it for your brother or sister or your uncle who would think it was the coolest thing he's ever seen. Especially if he's older, got a little tape animation, makes his phone sound better. Might be a bit clunky because I think dongle DACs with the USB connection are a bit clunky. But this is better as a Bluetooth DAC because it's got like some control buttons on the side so you can play pause. Mm-hmm. And I think it's got a microphone in it as well so you can make phone calls. You see what I mean? It's got more of a mainstream vibe to it.
Right.
That's probably why they've gone with this new brand because it doesn't say FiiO on the front of the device. It just says Snowski and Bluetooth amp.
Okay, well, I'm going to raise those stakes to $8.49.
Okay.
And this is what you get for it.
Is this going to be one of your wackadoodle items, Srajan? I know you love to bring these in. This is a power socket not power socket, a power plug.
You also get one of them.
Okay, so you get a UK. It's a power brick. It's a switch mode power brick, and you've got swappable pins on it, right?
Right. And
Which
you also get one for South Africa, and you get one for the EU, a sugar plug. But obviously, you get more than that.
Right. Okay. Okay, we've got a silver box with 5 buttons on it. Oh my goodness! It looks like it's a LAiV. It's a LAiV. I guess that's why. So it's some kind of. I think I know what this is. This is a DDC, isn't it? It's a digital input, digital output, right?
That's actually what it says right there. It's called the micro DDC.
On the chamfered edge, it says DDC. So it looks pretty blingy.
We have a silk screen on the front with associated white or blue LEDs.
Okay.
We've got 5 input control buttons on the top, and then on the back, we've got coax.
Oh, you've got everything on there.
AES EBU.
Yeah.
I2S over HDMI and USB. Those are all inputs.
Right.
Then we've got one BNC, which is a 10 megahertz master clock input. And then we've got I2S over HDMI out. That's the one and only output. And then on the far other side, we've got a regular power umbilical for our little wall wart.
Yeah.
Of course, here we could alternatively put a linear power supply that does 5 volts, 2 amp. And on the top, we have a USB-C power inlet. So this could also be powered by USB.
Right.
So the slightly or very esoteric nature of this thing is what you just noticed. It has a number of digital inputs, but it's only got one output. And the one output is on I2S, which you always call catnip. So if you're
I2S is audiophile catnip. It was designed for short distances inside CD players, for carrying the signal from a disc to the internal DAC, right? And then for some reason, I don't know why. Well, I know why, because I think it carries clock data as well as audio data, so you don't have to infer the clock as you do with coax and Toslink, right?
Right. I mean, to say it very crudely, in SPDIF, you've got the left and the right and the clock signal all in line, running down the same conductor. And on the receive end, it has to get descrambled into the left channel and the right channel, and then the clock signal. And I2S runs individual lines for each of those data, so they don't have to get descrambled.
Right.
Now, usually,
I got to say, this audiophiles love I2S. For them, it is the ultimate bit of audiophile catnip. Like if they can connect something to their DAC I2S, oh, they're so happy. Even if it makes no difference whatsoever. I'm not saying it doesn't. I'm not saying it does, because it might do. But
well, this is probably how I would put it. That if I had a choice between coaxial SPDIF, BNC SPDIF, Toslink, AES EBU, and I2S over either RJ45, so Ethernet, or HDMI, I would always prefer HDMI I2S. If my DAC can receive it, and if I have cables of equivalent quality to compare the different standards. There is a difference, but it is small. And one way that you can easily hear it, if you listen to this type of music, is classical music with a lot of mass strings.
There you go. See, that's not me.
Yeah, exactly. But here's why. Just imagine you have 12 violins just playing in the first violin section. You have another 10 in the second violin section. You might have 8 violas. You might have 6 celli. And you might have 4 contrabasses. And each section plays in unison. The 12 first violins play the same thing. The 10 second violins play the same thing. But we're not talking about synthesizers. We're talking about human beings. So there's slight imperfections in intonation, which means pitch. So instead of being completely flat, the signal is constantly slightly oscillating. There's like little ripples in amplitude, which gives it that feeling of, you can sense the scale. But that's why masked strings are super sensitive to distortion that you would not hear on a solo violin, and you would not hear them on a solo guitar unless you really know what those sound like. But on masked strings, even if you don't go to classical concerts, you can pick up distortion quite easily, micro distortion. And that's when I hear that I2S can make a difference. But anyways, this is basically an I2S generator for people that have a DAC with an I2S input over HDMI, and they never had a way to use that input. It's only for those people, and it's only for people with a single DAC. Because unlike my USB bridges that have basically one USB input and then 4 or 5 different outputs, they can supply reclocked, dejittered, decontaminated signal to 4 or 5 different sources at the same time. This can only do it for one component. But the primary function is really as a buffer and a reclocker. The I2S, in my mind, is only a secondary function. But it does the same job that my Singster USB bridges do.
Right.
It just needs the right kind of DAC. And the one criticism that I have, that has not to do with the product so much as with the way it is being marketed, is that you and I both know, and maybe some of our listeners will too, is that I2S doesn't have a fixed standard. And not only that, even if a send and receive component use the same plug, like an HDMI plug or an Ethernet plug, we still can't be sure that their pins are configured the same.
The pin mapping might be different, yeah.
Which is why useful I2S devices have to have configurable pins.
Yeah.
LAiV gives us 8 different configurations, and they are adjusted with the combination of the top buttons and then which of the LEDs light up. But they don't tell us which mode relates to what commercial DAC with I2S. You have to try this out by ear, and if for some reason it doesn't work, it's refund time. Now, why can't they make a list that says that if you get the T+A Audio, perfect wave, you need mode number 1. If you have the Singster blah blah blah, it's mode number 2. At least make a list for the 20 most popular DACs that use I2S. But no, they leave it entirely up to the user. And if you spend 849 euros from something that ships from Singapore, and it ends up not working, or you have distortion, or your left and right channel are inverted, or there's clicking noise, or DSD doesn't work, you'll be unhappy. So that's the one thing that I wish they had already done or will still do. Come up with a list. So they take out the mystery of whether this thing is compatible with what you have. But otherwise, I would have to say that LAiV Audio are one of the brands that are sort of putting the final nails in the coffin of legacy Fi, where as far as looks and build quality were concerned, they purely aimed at man caves, and they got away with murder. And ever since we had the iPod, and now then we have, the smartphones, the level of sophistication, fit and finish, and the quality of materials has gone way up. And this is like one brand that tries to follow those expectations in the hi-fi sector. I think it looks very jewelry-like, and you can get it black or silver. And so if you're coming from an expensive smartphone and you expect your audio sort of to look the part, I think this does. And I think that does deserve, applause.
Well, it's another Asian company that's kind of, as you say, is really kind of bringing the fight to more established brands. We're just going to see more and more of this, really. I mean, I think the only thing that could screw it up is, and I'm not going to mention his name, but the thing that could screw it up is tariffs. is trade tariffs, right? Could really put a dent in the markets of these kinds of brands. Just as a completely different economic issue, because I want to get out of it as quickly as I went into it. Just as Japanese brands are having a tough time selling into export markets right now because their currency is so damn weak. Mm-hmm. So they're really doing it tough, I would imagine Luxman or AccuPhase must be having a tough time of it. One of my patrons was telling me how, I shouldn't say this, but I will. I'm not going to name the name, but or the brand, but he's buying gear direct from Japan. I won't say where he lives, but he's able to do it, via contacts he has there. And the dealers there are all too happy to service him because that's another way for them to sell gear that they can't really shift. Maybe there's only so much they can shift locally, so they're looking to unofficial channels internationally. That's how bad it is, right? So I don't know, but I think
I think we should just very briefly get back to the tariffs, just to say to people that it's not just about Chinese products. It's about parts that are made in China, right. Even though they are very often badged American or European. If suddenly all of those parts that are used by European and American brands get hit, we can very easily imagine that prices will increase. We don't know by how much. We don't know what the multiplier will be. I've read somewhere that they expect at least 10% for China. There's a proposal of 25% for Canada and Mexico. Yeah. But if it's just 10% on the parts side, and then you multiply that by build cost, I think we can all prepare for probably rising prices in all across the audio market.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's. It's just we're living in some very insane times again. But I'm not going to mention. I don't want to get into politics too much.
But I think that if people have an interest in hi-fi or have their eye on a particular product, I think given what might be coming, don't hesitate. I wouldn't wait very long.
And is that it? I think that is it, isn't it, Srajan? We've done
I'm all out.
Yeah, me too. Well, cool, short and sweet. Thanks very much.
Thank you.